Greetings, I'm Patrick Wood, Editor-in-Chief of Technocracy.news, author, among other things. I thank you for the opportunity to present a little bit of information about the war on food, the war on agriculture and farms and ranches all over the world, not just in America, although it's been happening a lot in America. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up on a farm in Northern California and on a ranch, half farm, half ranch. I did all the jobs that a young kid could do on a farm and a ranch, from hoeing weeds and digging weeds to running tractors and harvesters to punching cattle and doing roundups and branding and all that kind of stuff. I had a very long history dating back, and a little bit later in life, in my midlife, I was able to be in the farming business myself directly for some period of time. The guy in charge, so to speak. I didn't do that too long, but a few years. And so I have a pretty good connection to the land and to what's going on in agriculture around the world today. So I want to share a couple of those things with you. And I've just got a few minutes to explain this, but I think it's going to be somewhat worthwhile. My most recent book, The Evil Twins of Technocracy and Transhumanism, basically tells the story that we face an enemy in the world today that is not political. This is not a political issue at all. This is another type of an enemy that we've never faced before in history. And this is a book that connects the dots for people. It's a very simple book to read. I wrote it for people that are kind of coming out of the fog for the first time, looking around, thinking, how do we get to where we are? What's going on? Why are these forces, chomping on us? Routinely all the way across the line, I've had very good reviews from individuals about, the content of my books and so on. The book right before that, my middle book written in 2018, was Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order. This was basically describing the journey that we've taken for the last 45, 50 years. That's how long I've been studying globalization. To see how we ended up today, where we are today. My book right before that, 2015, was Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. This was kind of the foundational book, the result of my original research that I did for several years, actually, to come to this point of understanding historic technocracy to the point where I could actually write about it. And so all three of my books now kind of form a trilogy. I'm not sure I'll write another book on technocracy, maybe, but right now what I have is pretty good, and it stands as kind of the source, if you will, for all things technocracy and now transhumanism. Well, this leads us to this issue today, the war on food. In every one of my books, I talked to some extent about agriculture and how the wrenching transformation is taking place is affecting agriculture. But this is beyond this. We have a polycrisis, as I call it, a polycrisis of doom in the agricultural world going on right now. We have, for instance, a war on the land itself, where land is coming under attack. I'm going to show you a couple of headlines that make this point. We have a war on water, distinct from everything else, where water is being shut down for farmers around different places in the world. We have a war on fertilizer, which is, of course, the thing that helps crops grow. We have a war on seeds, the individual things of life that you have to plant in order to get crops. And we also have a war on animals, and that would include other things like fish and birds as well. But this war that we're facing is unmistakable at this point. If you look at these parts individually, you might not see the whole picture. But when you take them all together, you'll not only see the picture, it jumps out at you. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It's amazing. This is the war on food. That means it's a war on humanity as well, because without food, we die. And this is a pretty scary prospect. I'm not going to get into it, but some of you historic scholars will remember back to a time in the last century called the Holodomor. It had to do with Ukraine, as a matter of fact, where the means of production of food was taken away from the farmers, and there was a massive famine that followed. This was an intentional policy that happened back then. It was a massive disaster that followed that, humanitarian disaster too. It was just absolutely incredible. So what I want to do for a few minutes is take you through just a few headlines that I have on technocracy.news, which is my primary website for professional things like this, and show you some of the things, just talk through them just a little bit to show you some of these things that we're dealing with. This is absolutely amazing. A couple of years ago in China, which I do believe China is a technocracy today. I realize many may disagree with me on this, but just follow along with me. China is an engineered economic system today. That was the heartbeat of technocracy originally back in the 1930s when it was created. But here we have a story that came out of Beijing. Very few people I ever saw commented on this story. It is no wonder. It's kind of a frightening prospect. But the story was, and this is it reflected in my headline, their new urban agenda, that the Chinese government planned to move 100 million farmers into the cities by 2020, basically kicking them off their multi-generational land, kicking them out of the only profession they ever knew, and moving them into high-density, high-rise apartments, cities that were built basically empty. They called them ghost cities a few years ago, to send these people packing off the land and into these cities. Well, were they going to pay them money? Maybe a little bit just to get started in the city. But basically, they had no choice. 100 million farmers. That represented 12% of the rural population of the entire nation. That was huge. And so what the plan was for them was they'll be gone, and so we'll consolidate the land. We'll take it from them, that's what it means. We'll consolidate the land and create a factory farming situation where we'll have giant agricultural firms come in and grow the food on the land. Now, what's happened since then, I think maybe some of them did get transferred into the cities, but what's happened since then, China has pivoted to grow more and more food in greenhouses, giant, we're talking 100-acre, hundreds by hundreds of acres of greenhouses that they're growing food in, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 levels, and they're minimizing the necessity of using land to actually grow crops. But the farmers were not asked their opinion about leaving. They just simply said, no, you're on your way out. You might as well, get lost, and we don't need you here anymore. An incredible travesty of human, I don't know, whatever you'd call it, kindness. I'm not sure. But 100 million farmers, and that's their families too. That's more than 100 million. So you got children, you got your spouse, you may have other people in your family. Absolutely incredible. This shows you, from one nation's perspective, what the war on food and the war on agriculture is all about. Here's another one. This is an article. It's a little bit newer, but it has to do with Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka collapsed. The whole nation collapsed. If you didn't know this, it was a horrible situation. But the president of Sri Lanka picked up an idea from the United Nations that it would be a good idea to cut back on nitrogen-based fertilizer for their farmers because, after all, it creates pollution and it does bad stuff to the atmosphere, they said. So he came back with a bright idea. Well, if cutting back 30% is okay, why not just cut out all fertilizer? So he cut out fertilizer for all the farmers. Well, guess what happened? The food supply collapsed and people started starving to death, to the point where the whole nation collapsed, economically collapsed, and the people took to the streets. They stormed the Capitol, where the president's office was. They sent him packing. He fled the country in fear for his life because he has so destroyed his country, all because the president of that country decided that they didn't need fertilizer anymore. They just have to make do with less and be more responsible or whatever. What a stupid thing to do, but this is what we see all over the world. We see it in Holland, for instance. Dutch farm nightmare continues as government demands compulsory purchase of 3,000 farms. I think they've raised that now maybe to 4,000 or 5,000. But here's the tractorcade. These farmers knew that if their nitrogen-based fertilizer was cut back by 30%, which the government said they were going to do, those farmers are out of business. Their crop yields would be so low that they would be guaranteed to lose money every single crop they planted. So they said, we might as well make this the hill we die on. We might as well just shut the government down, shut everything down, and show people how serious this is and how stupid the government policy is to take away nitrogen-based fertilizer. Well, push came to shove, and the government said, yeah, we're just going to reduce the number of farms by that much too. So we're going to force you guys to sell to us and kick you off your land. So it kind of sounds like China, doesn't it? Just, we don't need you anymore out there on the land. Many of these farms were multi-generational farms as well. Not that the farmers were not bright enough to do something else. They probably were in a technological world. It's very technical these days, technological to run a farm of any size. Just imagine running those tractors. They're all electronic now. It takes a lot of skill to run them and keep them running, I might add. But we see this pattern now everywhere. Canada has announced it's going to cut back fertilizers by 30%. The United States is working on policies right this second. As I cut this video for you, they're talking about it, cutting us back by 30% in America because it causes global warming, and can't have that. So, to heck with it. We don't need food. Food, who needs that nasty old food anyway? Just cut them back. Well, we're growing crickets and insects over here in this other factory where very efficient, they don't eat much, and their protein is just as good as that good old T-bone steak you'd have on the Barbie. Well, okay, if they say so, right? So then you have the headline that came out of Europe speaking about food that you want to eat. The EU now has approved house crickets, the ones you find in your house, and mealworms for human consumption. They're saying, yes, it's good for you. It won't hurt you at all. It's it's a great source of protein. You can make shakes out of it. You can use it as a supplement in your other food. And this trend is all over the world now. Let them eat bugs, they say. We don't need meat. You don't need red meat. You don't need, all this other stuff. Let them eat bugs. And bugs are easy to grow. You can create a bug factory, on 2 acres of land and grow tons and tons of cricket protein. Okay, no thank you. I'm not up for a meal of crickets anytime soon. Then you have, for instance, giant company Siemens, one of the largest companies in the world. The chairman of the board, who happens to be a vegetarian, by the way, the chairman of the board, publicly and openly at the World Economic Forum, this last meeting, called for 1 billion people to stop eating meat. Do you realize how many? That's a lot of people. That's a good percentage of the entire planet. And of course, a lot of people don't eat meat right now, not because they're, adverse to eating meat. They just don't have any meat, and they don't have any money to buy meat. And so, take those people away, and the people you're left with, especially in the industrialized world. 1 billion people should stop eating meat, he said, in order to save the world and cut down on global warming, he said, which is, by the way, you might gather my opinion, is a disaster or a doctrine that's completely crazy. But, man didn't cause global warming, in my opinion, and man's not going to solve global warming, in my opinion. But the only solution ever offered is to go straight into sustainable development, Great Reset kind of thing that the United Nations and the World Economic Forum planned for us. No thank you to that either. Then you've got, this is a great story, then you've got the United Nations making this proclamation that because agriculture produces 1/3 or so of global warming harmful greenhouse gases, that they're to blame for global warming as much as anybody because there's a few number of people, but they're causing a whole lot of ruckus. So the United Nations wants control over agriculture now on a global basis. How's that going to work out, considering what the World Health Organization just did to us? They want to control all of agriculture over the whole planet. Oh, thank you. That's just going to work out great. And, as I always write a comment at the top so people can have a context of what they're reading. But restricting farming and ranching reduces life-sustaining food needed to keep humans from going extinct. Bottom line. If we don't give people food to eat, the human race will go extinct in short order. what kind of insanity are these people thinking? The war on food, the war on humanity is absolutely unmistakable. And let me just give you one last thing here. Poison the earth. Monsanto's glyphosate found in 80% of U.S. urine samples. Now, this is just scratching the surface of this whole issue. But we know now through studies that have been done, Monsanto's glyphosate weed killer, that if you spray it on their crops that are glyphosate resistant because of genetic modification, the plant won't die, but the weeds will. That's the theory. And they have sold so much glyphosate all over the world to complement their seeds that farmers have to buy from them, genetically modified seeds. They license, every farmer that plants their seeds has to pay royalties back to Monsanto for using their seeds. That's what ownership over genetic material is all about. So they pay Monsanto a royalty, and then they turn around, they have to buy the glyphosate from Monsanto to spray on their fields to kill the weeds and not kill the plants. Otherwise, other herbicides kill the plant too. So the world has sprayed so much glyphosate, that's called Roundup, by the way, that's the generic name. So much of this has been sold in the world on an annual basis that the world cannot break it down fast enough. In other words, it does degrade, but not as fast as they're putting it on the fields. So now you have basically the entire planet has been affected by glyphosate. This is part of the war on food. You know, they said originally that they were going to help farmers, they were going to help food supply, they were going to, like the United Nations says, they're going to eliminate hunger. That's one of the 17 development goals that the United Nations put out. They're going to eliminate hunger. Oh, that's the wonderful thought. Poverty too, but wonderful thinking. But then companies like Monsanto come along, and they were participants way back when all this stuff was created. They weren't talking about really helping humanity at all. They were talking about rape, pillage, and plunder of humanity, more likely than not. And they have. They've modified virtually every seed crop there is now on the planet. They charge farmers to lease it back from them or license it back from them. And then they put them in a position where they have to buy glyphosate and basically poison the soil and poison the plants to some extent. To the extent now where 80% of urine samples in the United States have some trace of glyphosate in them. This is a war that we never intended to fight, I have to say. Nobody had a clue that we're going to fight this war that we're fighting today. The war on food, on land, on water, on fertilizer, on seeds, on animals, and it's going from bad to worse. If we do not stop this madness, especially in America, there will be some mass dislocations, ultimately, of our agricultural system. Did not have to be this way. Farmers could have taken care of everything just fine by themselves, leave them alone. They know how to grow food. They would feed the world. But right now, the interventionist policies that we have coming from our government, from the United Nations, from the World Economic Forum, et cetera, are all telling us we need to do these things in order to be sustainable. In the meantime, they're giving us a prescription, essentially, to destroy humanity. No, this is wrong. We don't want it. We can't afford it. No, this is going to be existential at some point. Well, those are just a few thoughts I wanted to give to you, and I thank you for listening, and I hope this is helpful. I have no clues. I can't see your face. I wish I could. But I know a lot of the people at CHD, I know it's going to be a great symposium. Thank you to Dr. Nass for inviting me to speak, and the other people that are producing this. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again sometime. I'm Patrick Wood, as I said, for Technocracy News and Trends. Thanks for listening, and God bless.